December 16th, 1944, Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The snow falls thick and silent, muting the distant rumble of engines. 1,000 iron beasts, panthers, tigers, and half-tracks crouch beneath the pines, exhaust vapor curling into the frozen morning air. Among them, SS Standartenführer Joachim Peiper, commander of Kampfgruppe Peiper, stands beside his Panther command tank, binoculars pressed to his eyes. His mission is audacious: spearhead the 6th Panzer Army through the Ardennes, reach the Meuse River, and seize Antwerp. A single blow to split the Allied front in two. At 5:30 a.m., the stillness explodes. Artillery fire hammers the American lines. Peiper lowers his binoculars and climbs onto his tank. "Los! Move out!" he shouts, his voice swallowed by the thunder of engines. The narrow forest roads tremble as the armored column begins to move, black crosses painted hastily on their hulls, white frost clinging to their tracks. By nightfall, Peiper's men have smashed through the 99th Infantry Division's thin lines near Lanzerath Ridge. His column surges westward, devouring miles of frozen countryside. But every victory eats into something far more precious than ammunition: fuel. His Panthers and Tigers gulp diesel like thirsty beasts, and the promised supply convoys are nowhere to be found. "We advance on gasoline and faith," Peiper mutters to his adjutant, Hauptsturmführer Werner Sternebeck. The German offensive, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, is supposed to rely on captured Allied supplies. The plan assumes the Americans will flee, leaving fuel and food behind. For now, it seems to work. The roads are littered with abandoned U.S. jeeps, overturned trucks, and the spoils of surprise. Peiper's men push on, seizing every drop of gasoline they can find. The snow-streaked Ardennes echo with the growl of tanks and the cries of retreating soldiers. Late on December 17th, Peiper's spearhead overruns the U.S. 285th Artillery Observation Battalion near Bogness Crossroads. The fighting is brutal, chaotic, and soon turns infamous: the Malmedy Massacre, a stain that would forever shadow Peiper's name. But he doesn't stop to count bodies. He's focused on speed, on reaching the Meuse River before the Americans can regroup. By the morning of the 18th, Peiper's column has clawed its way into the small Belgian village of Stavelot. The cobblestone streets are slick with ice, the air thick with smoke, and the scent of burning fuel. His lead Panther crashes through a barricade, and a cheer goes up among his men. Ahead lies one of their primary objectives: an American fuel depot. The German commander leans out of his tank hatch, eyes glinting at the sight of rows of U.S. fuel drums stacked like treasure under the falling snow. 50,000 gallons, his supply officer whispers, awestruck. Peiper smiles grimly. "Then, gentlemen, the road to Antwerp just got shorter." He orders the depot secured and begins refueling operations immediately. The captured American fuel, high-octane gasoline meant for Shermans and half-tracks, flows into German tanks as laughter echoes through the frozen air. Men pat each other's backs. For a moment, victory feels possible. For a moment, Germany's war machine breathes again. But in the distance, Peiper can already hear the dull, rhythmic thunder of American artillery. The counterattack is coming, and with it, the end of his illusion.
The Road to Laguise, December 19th, 1944, Stavelot, Belgium. Snow drifts into the shell-pocked streets as Peiper's column refuels. The captured American gasoline sloshes into steel drums and tank hulls, a lifeline in liquid form. Every drop means another mile forward. Yet the officers know they are deep behind enemy lines, and the roads ahead are narrowing like a noose. The Panther engines roar to life, shaking the frosted trees. Peiper climbs aboard his command vehicle, the Panther No. 001, and signals the advance. The next target, Laguise, a key junction that opens the route toward Laguise and ultimately the Meuse River. But as the column rolls out, a chilling report crackles through the radio. Americans have blown the bridge at Laguise. No crossing possible. Peiper's jaw tightens. Then we take another. He knows the terrain too well. Every alternate route is narrow, exposed, and crawling with U.S. roadblocks. He orders the column to push north through Stoumont. The once quiet Belgian villages now echo with the growl of engines and the thunder of artillery. Civilians peer from cellars as black-clad SS men march through the snow, their boots crunching in rhythm. At dawn on December 20th, Peiper's lead elements reach the outskirts of Stoumont. But waiting for them are Sherman tanks of the 740th Tank Battalion and infantry from the 30th Infantry Division. The Americans are dug in, and their guns are ready. A flash, a deafening crack, and the first Panther erupts in flames. The ambush is swift and devastating. The narrow streets become a death trap. U.S. bazookas fire from windows. Machine guns rake the snow. German tank crews bail out, firing pistols and MG-42s into the white haze. The smell of burning fuel mixes with smoke and blood. Peiper shouts into his radio, "Forward! Break through!" But his column is pinned. Hours drag on, and by afternoon his tanks are low on fuel again. The fuel from Stavelot, their golden prize, is nearly gone. The supply trucks never arrived. The Americans are cutting off every road behind them. As dusk falls, Peiper's men huddle in the ruins of Laglaise. The temperature drops below freezing. The once proud spearhead, 117 tanks and vehicles at the start, now stands battered, less than half operational. The village church tower looms over the scene, its bell silent, its roof shattered by artillery. Inside a commandeered farmhouse, Peiper spreads a map over a wooden table. Candlelight flickers across his face, the proud, handsome officer now gaunt with exhaustion. His adjutant points at the roads marked in red. "All bridges destroyed, we are surrounded." Peiper nods slowly. He stares at the fuel gauge of a Panther through the window, needle deep in red. He whispers, "Without fuel, we are statues made of steel." His men sit quietly, cleaning rifles, melting snow and helmets for water. The forest outside is alive with distant American voices, radio chatter, and the low hum of engines, enemy armor closing in. Peiper steps outside into the night. Snowflakes cling to his leather coat. In the distance, the wrecks of Panthers smolder, their turrets twisted toward the sky. He knows what this means. The dream of reaching Antwerp is dead. Germany's last gamble on the West has stalled, not by defeat in battle, but by emptiness of fuel tanks. Somewhere in the distance, a single engine sputters and dies. Then another. The silence is absolute. He turns to his men. "Prepare to hold Laglaise," he says quietly. "We fight until the last drop, of gasoline or blood." The men nod. They know the truth. The Reich's war machine has run dry.
Encircled in Laglaise. December 22nd, 1944. Laglaise, Belgium. A frozen wind sweeps through the narrow valley as gray dawn creeps over the wreckage of what was once Kampfgruppe Peiper. The snow glitters faintly beneath the weak light, blanketing burned-out tanks and shattered vehicles. Inside the village, Peiper's men have fortified every building they can. Overturned carts, rubble, and sandbags forming desperate barricades. The village smells of diesel, smoke, and fear. Peiper stands in the courtyard of a ruined farmhouse, his black SS coat dusted with snow, the iron cross glinting faintly beneath his scarf. He studies his map one last time. The lines that once represented progress, the thrust toward the Moose, have become a coffin-shaped pocket. His once mighty column of 117 armored vehicles is reduced to barely 30 operational tanks and half-tracks, and fuel is almost gone. Radios crackle weakly, ammunition is low. The roads east, once open lifelines, are now cut off by U.S. forces of the 82nd and 30th Infantry Divisions. A burst of artillery interrupts his thoughts. Shells crash into the far end of the village, sending chunks of ice and slate flying. "Cover! Positions!" shouts an NCO. Peiper ducks inside a barn where a Panther crew is huddled beside their tank, the steel beast silent. Empty of fuel, a monument to futility. One of the crewmen looks up at him, face smeared with soot. "Standen für Führer, when do we move?" Peiper answers softly, when there is somewhere left to move to. Outside, the American tanks tighten the noose. M4 Shermans edge forward from the hills, their guns methodically pounding the village. The White Star insignia flashes briefly through drifting snow before each shell impact. Houses collapse one after another. The sound is like the breaking of bones. Peiper's men fire Panzerfausts from windows and cellars, each shot echoing like thunder in the confined streets. Through the smoke, Peiper spots a young radio operator crouched in the doorway, frantically turning a hand crank. The boy's lips are blue with cold. "Any word from command?" "Nein, Herr Standenwehrführer. Nothing since last night." The static crackles, hollow and endless. As night falls again, the temperature plummets below zero. Men wrap themselves in blankets torn from civilian houses, melt snow and helmets for water, and huddle around the few remaining vehicles for warmth. The tank's engines, once symbols of might, are now silent, their fuel drained, their crews reduced to infantry. Somewhere, an officer plays a mouth organ softly, the faint melody of Lily Marlene carried away by the wind. Peiper walks through the ruins, his boots crunching over snow and broken glass. He passes burned-out Panthers, their barrels pointing skyward like frozen sentinels. He pauses at a crossroads where a wooden sign reads Troyes Ponce 5 kilometers. The route, once his path to victory, is blocked by wreckage and American patrols. His face, normally carved with defiance, now bears something unfamiliar: acceptance. He turns to his adjutant, Sternbeck, who approaches through the smoke. "It's over, isn't it?" Sternbeck says quietly. Peiper nods once. "We'll not surrender. We'll break out, on foot if we must, but this place will not see our capture." That night, under a moon hidden behind snow clouds, Peiper gathers his surviving officers in a darkened cellar. Candlelight flickers over weary faces, men who have fought from Kharkov to Normandy and now find themselves trapped in a Belgian village that means nothing and everything. Peiper spreads his map once more. "At 2 a.m., we move east, through the woods. Leave the wounded with the villagers. Destroy the tanks, all of them. They are no use to us now." A silence follows, heavy, reluctant. Then one by one, the officers nod. Outside, engineers begin their grim work. Charges are placed under every remaining tank. Panthers, half-tracks, and armored cars, once the spearhead of the Reich, are turned into pyres of twisted steel. The ground shakes as one vehicle after another erupts in flames. The glow lights the snow like dawn. Peiper watches from the edge of the village, the fire reflecting in his eyes. He knows the sound will draw the Americans. He doesn't care. For him, the battle is already lost, the illusion of a revived Germany shattered by empty fuel drums and burning armor. At 2 a.m., under the cover of blizzard and darkness, Peiper and 800 surviving men slip into the forest. They carry only rifles, pistols, and what little food remains. Behind them, Leglaise burns, the last refuge of a dream turned to ash. By dawn, American troops of the 119th Infantry Regiment enter the ruins. They find nothing but silence, twisted steel, and snow drifting through the gutted shells of tanks. One GI kicks at a frozen Panther hole and mutters, "Ran out of gas, huh?" He's right. For all the fire and fury of Germany's final gamble, it ended not with explosions, but with engines gone.
The long walk back. Peiper's escape. December 23, 1944. The forests east of Leglaise. Snow falls in relentless silence, covering footprints as fast as they are made. Joachim Peiper trudges through knee-deep drifts, his face hidden beneath a frost-crusted scarf. Around him, a ragged column of 800 exhausted men stumbles through the Ardennes night. No tanks, no vehicles, no food. Only rifles and the occasional whispered prayer break the quiet. The forest is eerily still. The sound of engines, once the heart of their advance, is gone. The men march past burned-out hulks that glow faintly beneath the snow, black skeletons of what had once been the 6th Panzer Army's spearhead. The only light comes from the distant fires of Leglaise, now fading behind them like a dying star. Peiper keeps moving. Every step feels heavier than the last. He knows the Americans are closing in from all sides, patrols sweeping the villages, aircraft hunting anything that moves by day. The once proud commander now leads what amounts to a ghost battalion, stripped of its armor and purpose. A soldier collapses in the snow ahead. Peiper stops, kneels beside him. His lips are purple, his eyes glazed. "Ostain," he murmurs. "Get up." But the man doesn't move. Two others lift the fallen comrade and carry him, silently, into the darkness. There's no ceremony, no time. Every minute counts. The march continues. They move east, guided only by Peiper's compass and instinct. The forest seems endless, black trunks like iron bars in the moonlight. Occasionally, they pass through abandoned Belgian farmhouses, where the men pry open barns for shelter, huddle near smoldering embers, and chew on frozen bread. A few find discarded American rations and share them wordlessly. Hunger doesn't discriminate. By morning, the cold is unbearable. Frostbite has taken fingers and ears, weapons have frozen solid. Yet Peiper presses them forward. His voice, once commanding and sharp, is now hoarse but steady. "Keep moving," he says. We return to our lines. Alive. The sun breaks through the clouds briefly, glinting off the snow. Through the trees ahead, they spot movement, the faint silhouettes of men in long coats, rifles slung low. The column halts. For a tense moment, no one breathes. Then a German voice calls out.
Echoes of defeat. January 1945, Hansfeld, Belgium. The snow has turned gray, stained by soot and oil. The once proud roads of the Ardennes, where tanks once rolled like thunder, now lie quiet, lined with wrecks. Broken turrets half buried in ice, burned half-tracks leaning against frozen trees, helmets scattered like forgotten relics. The great offensive that began with such fury has withered into a slow, bitter retreat. Joachim Peiper walks among the ruins of his own making. His uniform, once immaculate, is now frayed and dulled by weeks of combat and frost. The iron cross on his chest glints faintly as he moves between the hulks of abandoned armor, the remains of Kampfgruppe Peiper. His Panther command tank still sits where it died, gun barrel aimed toward a horizon it never reached. The silence is overwhelming. Only the wind speaks. Whispering through twisted steel, carrying the faint scent of burned oil and pine.
Aftermath and legacy. Winter 1945. The Ardennes is quiet again. Where the ground once shook under the treads of German armor, there is now only the wind sighing through bare trees. The snow covers everything, the wreckage, the bodies, the scars of artillery. American engineers clear roads, bulldozers pushing aside the burned remains of tanks. Belgian villagers emerge from cellars, their eyes hollow, their homes shattered. For them, the Battle of the Bulge isn't a name yet, only the memory of weeks of fire and thunder. In the fields near Stavelot and La Glaise, Allied photographers capture what remains of Kampfgruppe Peiper. The images, stark and cold, will one day fill history books. Panthers and tigers half buried in snow, their guns still aimed west, soldiers' helmets frozen to the ground, fuel drums riddled with bullet holes. A U.S. officer, cigarette dangling from his mouth, gestures toward the ruins and says, "This was where they stopped." That image, tanks silent, snow falling softly, becomes one of the enduring symbols of the German army's last gasp. Meanwhile, in American mess tents scattered across the Ardennes, soldiers trade stories over 10 cups of coffee. One says, "Those SS bastards nearly made it, but they ran out of gas." It's spoken half in jest, half in awe. The idea that an entire army could be brought to its knees, not by defeat in battle, but by empty fuel tanks, becomes a legend in itself, a lesson in the power of supply lines and the limits of ambition. Historians will later call it Hitler's last gamble, but for the men who were there, on both sides, it was something far more human. It was cold, confusion, exhaustion, and the realization that even courage and discipline cannot overcome physics. In Germany, survivors of the 1st SS Panzer Division return home to a country in ruins, bombed cities, empty stations, mothers and wives waiting at platforms that no longer have trains. Many never speak of the Ardennes again. The veterans who served under Peiper bury their memories in silence, knowing that their commander's name has become synonymous not with glory, but with infamy. For the Americans, the Battle of the Bulge becomes a story of endurance, the stubborn defense at Bastogne, the airlifts through blizzards, the grit of ordinary soldiers holding the line in the dead of winter. Peiper's advance becomes a dark counterpoint to that story, a warning of what happens when fanaticism meets reality. Years later, military academies will study his campaign. Maps of his advance, fuel consumption charts, and battle diagrams are pinned to chalkboards at West Point and Sandhurst. Professors point to the lines on the map and say, "Here, at Stavelot, this is where he lost momentum. Not because of the enemy, because of fuel." That's the irony that endures. A commander who captured more gasoline than any other unit in the Ardennes ultimately failed because he could not move it. Fuel, that invisible thread binding all armies, had become the true measure of power. Post-war reflections. By the late 20th century, historians reassess Peiper not as a hero or a villain, but as a tragic emblem of the war's contradictions. Brilliant tactician, ruthless ideologue, capable leader, and war criminal. His story embodies both the strength and the moral collapse of the Waffen-SS, a reminder that technical genius and personal charisma cannot redeem moral failure. At La Glaise, time softens the scars but does not erase them. The Panther Tank 213, abandoned during Peiper's retreat, remains on display in the village square. Its armor is pitted by shrapnel, its barrel still angled defiantly toward the hills where the Americans came from. Tourists photograph it beneath plaques that read, "To those who fought here, and to those who never returned." Old men who lived through that winter tell their grandchildren about the thunder of the tanks, the columns of smoke, and the night when the sky glowed red with burning fuel. They speak of Peiper not as a legend, but as a ghost, one whose ambition burned bright and then vanished into snow and silence. Even today, the Ardennes keeps its secrets. Beneath the soil, fragments of steel and bone lie buried together. German, American, Belgian. The forest has grown back over the trenches, but on certain cold mornings, when mist hangs low between the trees, one could almost imagine hearing it again, the distant rumble of engines, the echo of voices shouting, "Los, move out." And somewhere among those echoes, fading but never gone, walks the ghost of Joachim Peiper, a man who once believed victory could be measured in gallons, a man who learned too late that wars are not won by tanks or fuel alone, but by truth, by morality, and by the limits of what men are willing to destroy for power. The Ardennes remains his monument, white and silent and eternal.